Morning, everyone, and welcome to the first of a series of internal audit webinars. Our webinars will be focused on emerging risks that have certainly been accelerated by the pandemic. First, some housekeeping items. You are muted, so please submit your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. 1 hour of CPE credit will be provided, and we'll send you support on that in the next couple weeks. The slides we present today will be available for you, and also we are recording if you would like to view at a future date. Again, welcome, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Sonny Brantner. I am an advisory partner at Briggs & Veselka and will be your host. We have 3 topics that we will be covering today with experts in their field. The first, emerging cyber threats. The second topic will be complexities that the pandemic has put on the supply chain. And third, creating a mindset for change in your company. Eric Bruce will serve as our discussion leader today. I met Eric about 20 years ago while we worked at PwC. Before joining Briggs & Veselka, Eric served as a chief financial officer, chief audit executive, and led a compliance group for a major oil and gas company. We are fortunate to have him at Briggs & Veselka and leading our discussion today. Eric, the mic is yours.
Thank you, Sonny. As Sonny's mentioned, we really have 3 exceptional speakers in the areas we most hear about often given COVID-19. The first 2 topics, cyber threats and supply chain, and the associated risk and impact on our organizations, I think we'll all agree have been with us well before COVID, but now require a fresh look and linkage to today's and our future environment. Our third topic, mindset for change, is always on audit leaders' minds, either in attempting to transform our audit groups and processes to meet the ever-demanding needs of our audit committees, boards, and company executives. Often we have forgotten our own people as a tremendous resource for change. Again, we ask that you submit your questions to Q&A section or icon of the screen, and we'll have our speakers offer their answers at the end of the presentation. Our first speaker is Michael Tripkosh. Michael is a CISSP, CISM, CISA, and is Director of Cybersecurity for Pathway Forensics, a subsidiary of Briggs & Veselka. Mike is our practice leader, managing and delivering services to our expanding cybersecurity practice. He comes to Pathway with 17 years of cybersecurity and risk management experience. He has served as Chief Information Security Officer for Fortune 500 companies and has worked with CISOs during this time as a cybersecurity consultant. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Eric. So one of the new motto for cybersecurity professionals since prior to COVID has been defenders have to be right 100% of the time, whereas an attacker only has to be right once. And we have to keep that in mind every day. And so what are some of the cyber trends that we're seeing that have been exacerbated due to COVID-19? Social engineering tactics, plain and simple, with a significantly increased remote workforce. The social engineering tactics are front and center. For example, if you type in coronavirus or COVID-19 into any search bar, you're going to see an increased number of registered domains, and you can't tell which one of those could be malicious. They'll either deliver spam, they'll deliver malicious downloads, and so forth. Next. Additional trends are ransomware targets. Now, ransomware has seen an explosive growth over the last couple of years. There's reasons beyond COVID for that growth, but we won't get into that today. What I will tell you is that ransomware targets are hospitals, medical centers, municipal governments, school districts, anywhere that is impacted by COVID or realizes a sense of urgency due to COVID makes them more of a target. What types of things elicit a predatory response from your cyber criminals are any type of a telehealth technology deployment or a relaxation of perimeter defenses. Telehealth technology deployments often are rolled out very quickly, and your standard Q&A likely doesn't happen due to the speed with which they have to deploy the solutions. And then the remote workforce has required the relaxation of perimeter defenses to make sure that certain one-off scenarios can still access the network. And then you have these overtaxed IT teams that generally don't circle back and close those gaps that they opened to allow this person to access the network. So your common types of threats that we're going to talk about, we talked about social engineering as a trend. Within social engineering, we see email phishing campaigns. And there's just too many topics to really get into, but the main ones are government announcements. If you get an email that says there's some type of an announcement from the government, you're very likely to click on it. Educational health links. They will redirect you to sites that are riddled with malware. This third one is one that you might smile when you see this, but it does work. There's a downloadable cure if you come to this website. A lot of people are going to click on that, and what they're downloading is a payload that is malicious and will take over their machine or encrypt their machine using ransomware. The other thing is, you see this in areas other than COVID, but COVID has been a big player here, is charity impersonations. They'll trick you into giving a donation, and the donation doesn't go to the deserving charity that you think it is. It goes to some hacker in a faraway country. And then the propagation of ransomware. Generally, the most successful attack vector is emails, where you have a user-initiated click, downloads the payload, and then the user's machine is machine zero in a ransomware campaign that will run like rapid fire or wildfire through an organization. Next slide. So in additional threats, credential theft. This is a big one that happens where it's due to the increased remote workforce. And what happens is attackers will do anything to get your credentials, and they'll do social engineering trolling, social network trolling, I'm sorry, and they'll do credential stuffing. What credential stuffing is that if I have your username and password to, say, your email account, I'm going to take that and I'm going to, I'll have an automated script that will run this username and password against thousands of websites. They could be medical, they could be financial, they could be social networking, and it'll try to log in with those credentials. And if they get hits, they'll use those to pivot then to other areas and pretty much take over your identity. Packet sniffers, if you go to public Wi-Fi, what'll happen is they will rebuild the connection. They'll capture all the connections at the location, like a Starbucks or at a hotel lobby, and then they'll go back home and they'll rebuild those connections. And a lot of times the initial credentials are sent in clear text, and so they'll capture those and they have your credentials. Next slide. So some of the cyber defenses, let's talk about those for just a second. So the biggest thing that you can do, most bang for the least buck, is cybersecurity awareness training. Email phishing campaigns, courses on safe browsing, social networking dangers. What I did as a CISO is I would always send out newsletters. I would have little contests. I don't care if people are competing for a $2 little plastic trophy. It's the fact that they're competing that would get them engaged, and I enjoyed having the contest for them. And then we had a cyber message or a theme that was part of the contest. Safe public Wi-Fi use, that's VPNs. What we want to do is create an encrypted tunnel from your location to wherever you're going. And then here's probably the most important thing that any user can do today. And this, again, goes beyond COVID-19. It's use passphrases instead of passwords. Not too long ago, our computing power would take years to crack an 8-character password with a combination of letters and numbers and special characters. Today, an 8-character password with those 3 complexity rules of letters, numbers, and special characters, most attackers can crack a password like that in less than 30 minutes. Passphrases, for those that don't know what a passphrase is, think of a Bible verse, lyrics to a song, a favorite verse from a poem, or just, for example, roses are red, violets are blue. Very common, but think about the length of that. It would take years for our computing power today to crack something like that. And it's easy to remember. Just don't write it down. Next slide. Another defense, and this one is specifically related to COVID-19 and the fact that we do have a significantly increased remote workforce, and that is requiring multi-factor authentication. So for those that don't know what that is, you might hear 2-factor authentication, MFA, 2FA. What that simply does is that significantly reduces the possibility of having your password brute forced, because even if an attacker has your password, they still don't have that generated token that you'll either get from a hard fob that you might carry around, an app on your phone, or a soft token that's generated on your device, being your laptop. One of the things we can do to protect against ransomware is keep your backups offline and offsite. What do I mean by that? So a lot of times when ransomware takes off and propagates through a network, it will also encrypt the drives, the network drives that contain your backups. So by keeping your backups offline, that means that if you have a shared drive, it isn't active unless the backup has actually taken place, and then it goes down. And you also should keep backups off-site. And then just stay vigilant. I thought, and a lot of other security professionals thought, that we would see just this plethora of new and more complicated attacks due to COVID. We're not seeing new attacks. We're just seeing more complicated or retreads of the same old things. And why? It's because that stuff still works. If it's not broke, don't fix it. These attackers know that, and the user is the easiest way into an organization. I'll turn it over to Abid.
Yes. Thank you, Michael. Appreciate that. Our next presenter is Abid Yusuf. Abid has over 20 years of experience in commercial supply chain management as an independent advisor and head of functions at Fortune 100 energy companies. He leads an independent consulting business that delivers exceptional operational results by focusing on end-to-end supply chain design and development, procure to pay, systems implementations, supplier performance improvement. He has created value across a wide range of industries, including energy, consumer goods, retail, information technology, heavy manufacturing, and financial services. Good morning, Abid. Welcome.
Good morning, Eric. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you to the audience for jumping on this WebEx this morning. So, as we all know, COVID-19 has changed the paradigm of many functions, including supply chain management. For those who live in the greater Houston area and operate businesses along the Gulf Coast, know that unfortunately we're very familiar managing through natural disasters, but I think we can all agree that the impact of the pandemic has been unprecedented in many respects. We've lived through the risks associated with sourcing from overseas. There was a big push about 20 years ago for overseas sourcing, low-cost country sourcing, which has helped keep our costs in check across the entire supply chain for both materials and for support services. But the big shift that we're now experiencing as a result of the pandemic is that these supply chains can be fairly vulnerable and require closer look and reassessment. The focus from cost management has evolved over to a much broader revenue assurance approach. If you'll switch to the next slide, I'll talk a little more detail about the supply chain cost savings approach that we've experienced here. Thank you. So on the supply chain cost savings side, which is what supply chain traditionally has in terms of value creation proposition, the focus is now a little broader than simply trying to reduce the cost of goods and services to a much more linked up or synced in with the demand forecasts to help renegotiate commercial terms with key suppliers. What that essentially translates into is trying to stay lockstep with the operations group, with the engineering group, to be able to understand how your own organization's demand has changed as a result of the pandemic, as a result of a drop in demand. For those of us who've been in the oil and gas industry, are clearly experiencing a demand destruction initiative underway right now, with a lack of travel, with work from home, and other aspects. The demand has diminished significantly, while the supply has been at its peak at the end of 2019. The highest that the oil production that the U.S. has seen has been unprecedented in and of itself. And so you combine those two forces, and you see an oversupply under demand situation, which has led to the impact that we saw in April on crude oil prices and natural gas. So in order to recover from that, having alignment with operations, with engineering on clear updated demand forecasts gives you leverage when it comes to renegotiating commercial contracts with key suppliers. It's also important to track adherence to contract terms with lower tier suppliers. These are what are typically known as tail suppliers. Most companies follow the 80-20 rule, where 80% of the spend is with 20% of the supply base. And usually that wide tail, that long tail, 80% of suppliers is often ignored because of the minimal impact that has to the company's bottom line. However, the pandemic has created an opportunity for companies to take a look at that long tail, because of the vulnerability in the supply chain of these suppliers can impact significantly to the owner operator. There are also opportunities to improve working capital that we're seeing companies adopt, such as negotiating extended payment terms and going through a surplus asset recovery process. Again, on the oil and gas side, which saw a boom in production over the last 4 or 5 years, there's been a lot of capital spending, a lot of OPEX, which has created surplus assets across the different geographies in which companies operate. And it's important to go back in and start to recover those assets, those idle assets or surplus assets, and convert those to cash. And then finally, acting on part rationing, inventory, and logistics. Consolidating that aspect of the supply chain is critical in helping not just to reduce the transportation costs, but also to optimize the assets and the inventory that companies have on their books. Next slide, please. So in addition to cost savings, I mentioned revenue assurance is something that we see a lot of companies focused on through supply chain management. And that's the evolving function and role that supply chain organizations can play within the broader context of revenue assurance. Mapping exposures to suppliers across all tiers and estimating impact is key here. Simply because you want to make sure that there are no vulnerabilities within the supply chain. And for those who are from the audit background can clearly understand the impact that that might have on the operations of an organization. Also supporting supplier stability and operational restarts as organizations start to ramp back up. It's critical that the suppliers are available, not just from a capacity standpoint, but also from a quality standpoint. There are a lot of systems out there that help vet contractor safety, operator qualification, and I think it's important to tap into those risk management technologies and solutions to help solidify and strengthen your company's supply chain. Driving greater supply chain risk management in the medium term is of key importance to a lot of organizations we work with, along with incorporating disruption-related metrics as opposed to key performance indicators managing the cost savings or the efficiency of your supply chain. The focus has quickly changed to disruption-related metrics, which help to create the predictive analytics and can forecast certain vulnerabilities within an organization's supply chain. Next slide, please. So in terms of the actions that an organization can take, first we'll talk about the short term and then the medium term. The first and foremost is to understand the exposure. Determine what is truly critical in terms of your tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers, right? Understanding which suppliers can essentially impact the day-to-day operations of the business is critical in going in and helping them manage their supply chain risk. It is a trickle-down effect, it is a contagion, and therefore it's important to be able to measure that and map that out. Also to make sure that you have enough inventory on site and accessible, and then conducting scenario planning to understand the financial and operational implications. More and more supply chain executives, chief procurement officers are being called into the boardroom to explain the downside risk of a prolonged shutdown and how organizations can quickly ramp up once demand picks up again. And so having that plan is critical, and it starts with understanding exposure. And then finally, working with operations and planning to get at least a 6 to 12 month demand forecast. So you can then match the supply and the source of supply to that demand once that happens. Having that partnership with operations and engineering helps you establish credibility with your supply base, helps you provide the leverage you need in order to go back and negotiate better contracts with preferred pricing and terms within the supply chain. Next slide, please. So continuing on that short-term trend action, the second one is taking action to address anticipated shortages. And this is being proactive to evaluate the transportation and the logistical bottlenecks. As an industry within oil and gas, we've often gone from feast to famine, and therefore we're somewhat familiar with the bottlenecks that get created along the way. And I think the importance here is to collaborate with parties, both the supplier as well as third-party logistics, and understand the capacity that they have, the constraints that they may have, and plan around that, or at least be aware of it. There are certain contracts that can be negotiated on a most favored nation status, and the right of first refusal that gives companies the ability to tap into capacity, get preferential capacity when the market really starts to pick back up. Watching for extended lead times. This is a leading indicator for any constraints that might occur. As lead times extend, It could be a short-term blip, or it could be a long-term trend that's indicative. And therefore, it's important to watch for that and be able to proactively manage it through the contracting structures I just described. And then finally, optimizing inventories across locations and leveraging distributors. I've personally done that in the CPO roles that I've been in terms of utilizing our large distributors to manage the inventory for us. It does a few things. One is it takes the cost off of the owner-operator's books. The second is they're more adept at managing inventory, at making sure that there is no or limited issue with redundancy. And so and they're always been very willing to work with owners, operators to help manage the inventory, because it ensures a certain amount of sale will eventually go to them. So that's been an effective lever to pull in times like this. And then the next slide, please. The last sort of short-term action plan or suggested action plan is to come up with a backup option, right? Which means expanding your supply chain beyond tier 1 suppliers. Most organizations are familiar with approved contractor list, approved vendor list, which is a list of qualified suppliers. The idea here is to broaden that out, to invest some resources in qualifying additional suppliers that are probably in the tier 2, tier 3 realm of an organization, and ensuring that they are either backup or now become the primary, depending on their capability and their proximity to your locations. Determining what portion of that supply can be swung to another site is also critical. And that's the optimization aspect that supply chain organizations can work with operations and engineering to better understand and manage. Should we fall into a situation similar to what we're going through right now, or when we're truly trying to ramp up at the end of this all. And then finally, determining possible geographies, supplier shortlist in case of alternate supply is required. So this again speaks to more of the proactive preparedness in order to make sure that we're not getting caught with vulnerabilities within our supply chains. And then finally, on the medium-term side, and this is more of an ongoing initiative. Sonny, if you can skip to the next slide, please. This is partnering up for continuous improvement of material supply stability. This is partnering up with your supply base, with third parties, as well as your internal organization to better understand your updated needs. A lot has changed within our worlds, specifically within the realm of operations and engineering for capital projects. And the supply base has evolved with time. Suppliers have proven time and time again that they can be resilient through these ups and downs, and through this process, they typically evolve their business model, their offerings. And in order to stay lockstep with that, it's important that there is a meaningful collaboration across suppliers, as well as your owner-operator, your operations group and the engineering group on an ongoing basis.
Thank you, Abid. We appreciate that. Our final presenter is Sandy Ash. Sandy is a TEDx speaker, best-selling author of Resilience, a thought leader, and a Woman of Influence award winner. Her book, Roar, has been named by Inc. magazine as one of the best business books written by a woman. Over the past 20 years, through keynote presentations, workshops, 40,000 plus leaders in 50 countries and 6 languages have implemented Sandy's ideas to embrace change, manage work-life balance, and be more resilient, to roar with purpose and passion. Welcome, Sandy.
Thanks a lot. Well, certainly most leaders I know are under pressure how to lead in this complex and uncertain environment. And both Mike and Abid spoke so well about how you build a resilient organization, resilient processes and operation. And we know that an integral and critical part of that is to build resilient people, because after all, a resilient organization is typically made up of resilient people. To effectively navigate this radical level of change and uncertainty of the world that we're living in, we have to develop a resilience mindset, a mindset of openness, of innovation, of agility, and give people the strength and the skills that they need to stay balanced, focused, and wildly productive, to be able to surf this wave that we're on and still produce extraordinary results no matter the circumstances. When we speak about resilience, most often we think about our ability to bounce back. And if you navigate to the next slide for me, and to be able to bounce back, to give your team the strength and the skills they need to be able to weather this storm and, future storms, who knows what's coming next. There are three really important components to that. And one is deep roots. Just like a tree grows roots deep into the ground to be able to absorb the water and the nutrients it needs to grow, so do the people in our organizations need to be deeply rooted to the values and a compelling purpose. And I'll come back and talk to that more. And for big trees that have weathered many, many years, we know that their roots not only go deep into the ground, but they spread out wide and can even crack through rock with that intense intention and commitment to be able to stand firm no matter how they challenged. When we have deep roots, just like a tree, we're able to build that strong core, that strong trunk, a set of habits or skills, really, that make us resilient. I don't think you're born resilient or you wake up one morning and you find that you're resilient. It's a proactive strengthening of a set of muscles. And when we have the deep roots and the strong core, just like the tree, you're able to grow tall and position yourself for optimal sun absorption. And I call that XO growth, exponential growth. And there is a possibility in this economy, in this COVID world, and we see that often, that some companies are growing exponentially. So the big question is, are you going to surf this wave and be able to leverage it fully, or are you going to get sort of tumbled? And I know for sure I've been tumbled by waves in the past. So to build a resilient team, on the next slide, I'm just going to speak briefly about three ideas, three skills that every leader needs, and particularly now, and also skills that your team needs to be able to stay balanced, focused, and positive in this quite crazy world. Number one, Velcro employees to your purpose. Number two, to build a resilient team, you must develop an agreement or an expectation that we don't engage in the downward spiral. I'll talk more about that. And number three, we must learn to respond, not react. So let's go to the next slide and talk a little bit about Velcroing to your purpose. Look, we've heard so many people talk about this, and I'm sure you've read so many books about the importance of purpose. And when people are Velcroed to their purpose, head and heart, and that's important, not just an intellectual sort of exercise of a vision or mission statement that's stuck up on a wall in a lobby somewhere that frankly most people think is just BS, but a purpose that really calls to people. And in uncertain times, we need a compelling purpose more than ever, because we're now looking for a way to anchor ourselves. We're looking for a compass or lighthouse. And because people are in an environment where they feel separate, isolated, they're lacking a sense of belonging, the more you can create and unite people around a sense of purpose, the more likely they are to stay focused and productive. The last couple of years, I've been consulting with the city of Houston, particularly Public Works, on developing resilient leaders and creating a culture of resilience, because as we know, Houston Public Works is responsible for the infrastructure, the water, the wastewater, the traffic, the permitting, everything that creates a strong foundation for Houston to thrive. And as part of that project, we helped to develop a very clear and compelling purpose statement. And through COVID, through the flooding, the threats of hurricanes, you know, all the things, the storms that are going on around us, one of the things that has been fascinating to watch is because we've created the strong foundation of resilience, these employees, these 4,000 employees, have really been able to weather the storm and stay balanced, positive, focused, and remain innovative. So the question for you then is, what is your company's purpose? And why is that important? Why is it important now? How are you contributing to your company or other companies or vendors or customers? And how can you use that purpose to unite your team to create alignment, clarity, and generate a new level of energy at a time when people are just really hungry for that? Let's go to the next slide. When your team is Velcroed to your purpose, they focus on what's important and they're less likely to get sucked up into that downward spiral. And, you know, when I talk about the downward spiral, I think of all the conversations and all the thoughts or the emails or the voicemails, everything that's going on around us that's draining our time, energy, focus, and spirit, the things that are bringing us down. I'm right, you're wrong, you know, what's going to happen? Will the economy ever come back? And really a perfect example of downward spiral if you happen to watch the debates last night. You know, but we see it everywhere. We're seeing it on the news, on social media, in conversation, this sort of sense of gloom, of doom, of uncertainty. And for sure, when that conversation is going on inside of the workplace, it's distracting people from producing extraordinary results at a time when you really, really need everybody to be fully present and focused and bring all of their energy and spirit. So the question then is, how can you begin to minimize that downward spiral conversation without becoming Pollyanna and sweeping things under the rug? That's not useful at all. But what if you set an expectation for yourself first and then for your team to focus only on what's necessary? And the term that I use is quarantine your thoughts. You know, we've been talking a lot about physical quarantining and physical immunity, but perhaps that mental quarantining and developing that mental strength and immunity is what's really going to help you, your team, and your company recover and be able to navigate this time. So the thought that I would leave you with in this section is, how can you use every conversation at work to move things forward and to create inspired action? Let's go to the next slide. This is a quick story that I'll tell you about the importance of looking up. Many years ago, I had the opportunity in a personal development workshop. I was consulting with a big personal development speaker, and part of the program was to walk on fire. So I walked on burning hot coals. I don't share that with you because I think I'm special. Maybe I was actually a little stupid. I did not get burned. And one of the important lessons that we were taught in order to enable us to develop that mind over matter and be able to walk on coals, and really walking on hot coals or walking on fire is just a metaphor for how you face any challenge or uncertainty in life. And the key lesson there was to look up, look forward, do not look down at the coals. Why? If you're walking on fire and you look down at the coals, you start to generate fear and uncertainty and start to dance and tiptoe on the coals, and that's when they get stuck in between your toes and you're most likely to get hurt. So I share that with you as just a visual reminder for, we're in a time really where we're walking on fire. We're surrounded by hot coals, and to keep your team and your organization focused and highly effective, it's so important to teach and train them, help them develop the muscle of not looking down. Keep looking forward at where we're going, how we're going to cross the river, how you're going to reach the end of the fire walk, more powerful, more effective, more productive, more profitable. Let's go to that next slide. You know, when we have a clear purpose, we're avoiding the downward spiral, we're looking up, that really gives us greater capacity to be able to respond and not react. Honestly, we could spend a whole 2 or 3 hours just talking about this particular skill or muscle. We know that when we're faced with challenge or crisis, when there's a storm, if we're not deeply rooted, if we haven't developed the skills and the strength, we tend to be reactive, and reactive behavior always has consequences. You know, it damages relationship, it erodes trust, it costs us business. And so this is a time as leaders for sure for us to ramp up our commitment to cultivating inner calm, C-A-L-M, calm internally, but also a calm environment. It's time for us to be very mindful of how we're managing stress, how we're managing our mental health. And honestly, mental health is going to become a huge issue in the workplace as a result of this COVID world. And so this is a time to ask yourself and to engage with your team about how we develop that calm focus, so that when we're faced with a storm, challenge, crisis, change, that we're able to respond effectively for the long-term good and don't catch ourselves in reactive behavior. And so to wrap up the 3 ideas that we leave you with today on the next slide, is to effectively navigate this time. And honestly, I don't know that we'll find a new normal. I actually hope we don't find a new normal, because where we find normal is where we get comfortable, and that breeds complacency. And in complacency and comfort, that's where we lose our business edge and our competitive advantage, and we start to coast. So from a leadership point of view, this is such a good opportunity for us to be talking about how to embrace uncertainty and to leverage that in a way that up-levels skills and up-levels your success in your department, in your team, and certainly in your organization. So a reminder to navigate change and uncertainty and to lead in these times. We must be purposeful, maintain an environment of positivity, focus only on what's necessary, and filter out as much of the noise as we possibly can. And then lastly, to cultivate a sense of calm, inner calm, but also a sense of calm and peace in the work environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. Appreciate that. We now enter a Q&A portion of the program. So please place your questions in the Q&A section of the, and each of you will be getting information in the slides on each of the presenters. You'll get the presentations, so you may contact them, and your CPE certificates of attendance will be available in a week or so. If you have any questions, you may email them to marketing@bvccpa.com. Since all the presenters have turned on their video microphones, I won't have to make that comment. So thank you. So would you please submit your questions? We have a few in there already. Sandy, the first question comes for you, and it is, how do you approach people who resist change?
You smack them around.
Okay, I like that answer.
That never works. Look, you know, I think what gets in the way of people's ability to embrace change is just fear. And when you look, I don't usually talk about change. Honestly, I talk about transformation. And I know that sometimes the word transformation sounds a little too fluffy and out there, but inherent in the word change, honestly, is a sense of resistance, of protect, defend, because the assumption underlying change is something's wrong and something needs to be fixed. And nobody really feels comfortable in that environment. When you're creating an environment of transformation, that's completely different. Transformation is an invitation to create a new future and to get aligned and excited about moving forward. And what I found in organizations over the last 25 years in all sectors, oil and gas, the public sector, financial sector, hospitality, as in the San Diego Zoo and beyond, is that people are hungry for transformation. They want to have an environment where they thrive, and they want to go to bed at night with a sense of fulfillment and satisfaction. And we all know that fulfillment and satisfaction, lasting fulfillment, comes from growth. And we're in a time now where growth and change is no longer an option. You know, we used to say that the world is changing fast, and to keep up, you have to be changing. But really, we're living in a world now where it's beyond lightning speed. I mean, if you think about it, the world came to a standstill in less than a week when COVID hit. So this is a time where, as leaders, we have to develop the mastery to enroll and engage people in creating a new future and rising up. And when we do that really well, people want to be part of that, because people want to be great and they want to live a fulfilling, successful life. That's my opinion.
Thank you. I have a question for you, that came in for you, Michael. If someone is wanting to be proactive about cybersecurity, what's a good first step?
So great question. A super first step is to take a look at your cybersecurity awareness. You want to develop a program that's engaging. Remember, cybersecurity awareness it's a cultural shift within an organization. You don't want to make it like a rule. You want to make it something that it becomes muscle memory for them. So the first step is to develop a cybersecurity awareness program.
Okay. Got this. We've got a question here. I'm not sure who to refer to. So just how are public utilities affected? I'm assuming, Michael, that might be to you. It says to all panelists, but I'm thinking maybe you've had some experience with that. And Abid, maybe you might be able to speak to that as well.
So as far as public utilities being affected, I'm really not sure I understand the question.
Right, it's just how are public utilities being affected? I don't know if I can clarify. I don't think I can clarify that, but I think if I were asking it, I would think, perhaps it's got to do with cybersecurity over our utilities and the grids that run those. Is there anything that could interrupt our service from a cyber risk standpoint?
So from that perspective, that's actually a great question if you frame it like that. One of the things that a lot of organizations never do is they don't really understand what they're trying to protect. So, what's the foundation for any cybersecurity program is a valid and up-to-date risk assessment. You want to identify the data that you have, and then you want to identify the threats to that data. And so in a public utility, I would think that their data would be, customer data. So you have PII, person identifiable information. And so, given a networking, probably given the scope or the size of that database, again, I'll fall back on, security awareness. Make sure that everybody is a part of the solution. Make sure that everyone understands the value of the data and the impact that that data being compromised would have on the organization and the utility itself.
All right. Thank you, Michael. Abid, I've got another question here that is maybe similar to the, not similar to the question we had, but is how best to start a partnership with your vendors. Typically, we only approach them on price.
Yeah, that's fairly typical in the way organizations have gone about the procurement aspect, right? It's very transaction oriented, and it has resulted in an effective value for organizations because there hasn't been this type of disconnect between supply and demand, at least not in my career. And so it's important to recognize the fact that there are supply chain vulnerabilities which prevent suppliers from honoring some of the prices that have been negotiated in the past. And therefore, it's important to go back to the drawing table with your own requirements, with revised specifications. There's several things that could be done here. One is to better understand your internal customer demand, right? How have your CapEx forecasts changed? How is your OpEx changed? We're all living in an environment of budget constraints because of the drop in demand. So we've got to make sure that we first understand our internal client needs, internal stakeholder needs, then sitting down with suppliers in a very transparent fashion and reviewing those with them. I think it's important to highlight here that you wouldn't necessarily do that with your entire supply chain, which can comprise of anywhere from 1,000 to over 10,000 suppliers, depending on the size of your organization, but to identify and map out the key suppliers, the ones that are critical to the day-to-day operations of your business. There are many risk management services out there that will help provide that mapping process. And then once you've identified those critical aspects of the supply chain, sitting down with them in a transparent fashion and sharing with them the plans going forward for CapEx, OpEx, service needs, and including them in any sort of forecast and budgetary process for 2021 and beyond. That is the first step that anyone would want to take to go beyond just the price saving aspect. You want to ensure contract compliance. You want to ensure that the savings that are being negotiated are actually flowing to the bottom line once the contracts are kicked off. In this sort of social media world, internet world, where our attention focus has been limited and can be due to resource constraints, it's very easy to go in and negotiate a great contract and identify savings. But when it comes time to implementation, a lot of organizations take their eyes off that aspect of it. And as a result, you get a lot of savings leakage in the process. So taking a more holistic approach, taking a step back, one, identifying your internal needs, two, the suppliers that are critical to your business, and then sharing with them your plans and developing the budgets with them is a good way to go about it.
Yeah, thank you. Good. Next one I have is for you, Sandy. In fact, I've got two here, but I think the one that seems to be the most interesting of it is asking if you could touch on your experience with Houston Public Works and any potential COVID impacts.
Yeah, definitely. I'll start with the people side of the business, because for me, that's, well, the most important part of the business. And one of the things I noticed is, because there was such a sense of unity, as I said before, and partnership, that we're in this together, that people were able to overcome extraordinary challenges. So for example, a good number of public works employees are essential workers, and they go out in crews, in trucks to, handle manholes or, wastewater leakages. And despite the fact that they're typically under-resourced, we found that they were very creative and sort of came together as a team to figure out how to keep themselves safe and how to keep each other safe and how to keep their families safe. So we even came across a number of essential workers who sort of moved out of their family home to keep their families safe because they didn't want to risk exposure. So I start with that because I go back to my point is when you have resilient people, you can have a resilient organization. And from a process and operation point of view, of course, Public Works was impacted, because as people became infected with COVID and were quarantined, there was a real stretch on manpower to operate some of the essential plants that provide the city of Houston with clean water, for example. So a lot of thought had to go into how to redistribute staff and how to keep them isolated, quarantined from each other and their families, and keep them safe, and go above and beyond to provide places for them to sleep and food so that these essential operations could be maintained. But as we sort of hopefully coming down the side of the curve, I was on a leadership team call with executive leadership at Public Works. We do that every week now. And this COVID experience has strengthened them and helped them to evolve their culture of unity, dignity, trust, respect, and sort of sparked their next level of culture transformation. And I'm actually going to start a blog pretty soon about what's happening at the city of Houston, because I believe in many cases it's an inspiration, an incredible case study for how with limited resources in a very underinvested infrastructure that needs to be managed, that when you create the right kind of work environment and culture, people are capable of incredible things, and they keep rising up over and over. It's been a really positive and uplifting story to be part of.
Right, thank you. So as we come to the conclusion of our program, I think I'll throw one to each of the participants, if you may, if you could think about it, your biggest takeaway from COVID in each of your areas of expertise. And you can just jump in, whoever wants to jump in first may do so. Again, biggest takeaway from COVID in your area of expertise.
I think in my area especially, I'm seeing a lot of people as tragic as things have become due to COVID. What I'm seeing is a lot of innovation. I'm seeing people wanting to help each other. I'm seeing that people want to get better. And what we're doing is it's almost like a cleansing effect. It's that we're identifying inefficiencies. And I think it spans beyond cybersecurity, but we're identifying areas that, well, that's just the way we've always done it. And now we're challenging that and finding other ways to do things. And it's as tragic as COVID has been, I think we're all going to be better for the experience.
Thank you, Mike. Anyone else?
Sandy, you want to go next?
Yeah, I'll just say this, the biggest takeaway from COVID is how we lead, how we manage people, the kind of work environment we create has to be reimagined and challenged in every single way. This is not about coming out of COVID and picking up the pieces and trying to reassemble the way we used to operate. This is about rethinking, redesigning, reassessing everything we know to be true about how we lead, what are the most important skills that we need to lead, and up-leveling those dramatically, but also how we manage people and the kind of environment that we create that can keep them focused, productive, and innovative.
And then from a supply chain standpoint, we clearly see the pandemic changing the perception of the value that supply chain organizations create within the broader context. That's shifting from a cost management focus to more of a revenue assurance focus through risk management, risk mitigation, right? And so we know historically that procurement organizations, supply chain functions have been very successful in managing costs, but this is our real true test of how we can help organizations manage through the risk, both seen and unseen. And we all know that the road ahead is still rocky. And so being prepared to go in and assess the risk and mitigate it is going to help keep organizations sound from a revenue assurance standpoint.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, that that concludes today's program. I want to thank everyone for attending. Briggs & Visocka looks forward to you joining us in the future as we continue to bring additional programs on topical issues with our clients. I say just goodbye and have a great day. I don't know, Sonny, if you have any closing comments, but that's
just one comment is this is another time that internal auditors have a chance to have a seat at the table and really play an active role in being a part of change in your companies. And I think two of the top areas before the pandemic and now during the pandemic and working out of it are going to be cybersecurity, supply chain, and helping your companies have that mindset to change.
great. Thank you, Sonny. I apologize for not calling on you because you do have had some thoughts in that area, and I would echo those as well. We found that our teams work well, have been working well remotely, and I think that's important that we understand that as well. So thank you again, and we'll see you next time.